Welcome to Goldfish on Games and Cover Disc Face Off XL, where we're turning the clocks back to March of 1992, and waiting for us in the magazine racks are Amiga Format, Amiga Action, the one for Amiga, Amiga Power, and See You Amiga. Fight! And kicking things off for us is the one for Amiga, that had a single disc with 2 demos. With the first being Fuzzball, that turned out to be a single screen platformer of the arcade collect 'em up style. Now you are relatively well armed for this type of game, as you have a very rapid fire that feels like it's just limited to your finger. But after you take out what looks like punk furballs, you need to move very quickly and collect those tiny balls, as otherwise the baddies will return and they will be a little bit angry with you. Which is a little bit of a problem, as our movement is best described as stilted. You can't just hold up to jump, you have to push it every single time. And if you're not fully landed, then you're not going anywhere. Which makes some of the more tricky jumps really annoying. Even just trying to go up this set of ladders is a real pain. And even on this first level, which is actually the starting level of the game, you have to deal with some obstacles that you can't defeat. So you have to work out the timing. And this isn't a great way to introduce your game. Now I did get better each time I played this, but I'm not sure I really enjoyed any of those attempts. It looks fine enough, but the gameplay just isn't there for me. The second demo is for Indie Heat, a racing game that lets you pick between 1 or 2 players, and then you get a chance to upgrade your car yourself, or you can leave it to the expert, Danny Sullivan, to pick what he thinks is best. And then it's off to the races, where it turns out to be a top-down racer. Now this is actually a port of an arcade game. And while I'm not all that great at it, I am enjoying it, and even managed to come in first a few times. Now while you're doing this, you'll have to deal with your fuel that will very quickly run down. Now this will require you to refuel in the pits, but you also have a turbo that will use up your fuel quicker, but can get you out in front. And at the end of the race, if you win, then you'll get onto the podium, and what happened to her eyes? Outside of some odd graphics, the rest of the game looks fine, and the cars move around quite quickly. It is a fun, if a bit limited demo. Driving in next, we have See You Amiga, that had some PD, utilities, as well as a few game demos. And let's start off with the picture of the month. And it's music of the month. And the picture is this nicely done Lamborghini. And the music is Oxan Bean. And See You's single PD game is Mine Clearer. And I think it's quite obvious what this is based on. Now it has a number of options that allows you to set up the grid, including some custom ones that let you set the size and the percentage of bombs, but it doesn't have some of the more fancy features of the other versions of Minesweeper. Like clicking both mouse buttons on a number won't clear the squares that it's obvious that can't have a bomb. This does mean you'll have to do a little bit more manual work, but overall it plays well enough even if it does look a little basic. And this version is as good a time waster as any other that I've played. There are also a number of tools, like Pop Dira, that adds a blue box to your Workbench desktop, and when you click on it, it will show a dialog that will let you select a drive and get a directory listing. This doesn't feel like the most useful program ever, as I think I'd rather just use Workbench, Dopus, or just the CLI directly. And talking of file browsers, we have Disk Master 3.2, something very similar to Directory Opus with its dual columns. Now each of these can show any of 9 different views, and each one can point to a different directory. Now this makes it easy to look around the disks and copy files around. Now this was needed at this point, as this was aimed at those still running Workbench and Kickstart's 1.3. That was far more limited then too. Now that's where I started, so it always surprises me when I go back to 1.3 how much is missing. So I can see why so many alternatives showed up in the early days. Now this one does seem quite good, even if it is a little clunky in places, as you have to right-click to enter directories, and then use the button at the top to go back to the parent. Or you can type in the name of the directory that you want if you know it. But overall, it is very useful, even if it might have been upstaged by better software that was coming down the pipeline. The difficult to pronounce Bora Bordor is the first game demo, a game that's made up of a few different game styles. You get this platforming bit, with some impressive scrolling going on in the background, with what appears to be puzzles with switches. But just as you're getting going, it will whisk you away to another impressive looking game mode, where you're driving down this road on a hovercraft, where you can fly around and shoot at the other cars. But this too will also end very quickly. This is an extremely time-limited demo, and to cap it all off, you have to restart your computer if you want to play again. I think the boot time to get to this demo might be longer than the demo itself, which is a massive shame, as this does look really interesting. But the shortness of the demo, it's really annoying, and it might actually be a bit of a negative point against the game. So let's move on to one of my favourite platformers on the Amiga, Harlequin. We've seen a demo for this game before, but that was a long time ago, and this is a little bit different from that, as it's far closer to the final game. The hero looks the same, and the movement is also what I'd expect from the full thing. Now this is a single level demo for you to go out and explore, and it mostly requires you heading all the way up the clock tower to flick a switch, and then you can either make your way all the way down to go through the door, or if you're clever enough, you can actually get up higher and grab the kite to make it onto, well, to the same screen that tells you, well done, you've completed the demo, you should go buy the full game. But along the way, you will have to deal with the clocks, both large and small, and you'll defeat them with the power of hearts. An odd weapon for a very odd game, that starts off like any other platformer, but then opens up to being something more like a Metroidvania style game. Not that this demo really shows that off. What it does show is that you have switches that will turn stuff on and off, and you also have abilities, like the Umbrella or Mr. Hoppy. You'll also find a few power-ups, like the stronger heart attack. Now this is a fun, if short demo, for an amazing game. Jumping into frame is Amiga Power, who had 3 PD games as well as a demo across its single disc. And starting with that demo, we have the Pacific Islands, the sequel to Team Yankee. Now this is the same demo that we've seen before, but it was quite a while ago. And to be honest, this doesn't really suit Amiga Power, but I guess they were still in that low point of the year for demos, so they just found whatever they could. Now after a brief briefing, you get to decide where your artillery, smoke and mines are placed, and what time they are launched at. And then it's on to that classic 4 views, one for each group of your tanks. And this is where I tend to have issues with this type of game, as I'm not particularly great at it. although they do give you a few stationary targets to get to grips with at the start. Now you can give movement orders on the map, and then you can jump into any of the 3D views to line up your shots. It looks very nice, if a little slow on a classic A500. More so if you want to look at what all the tanks are seeing at once. But that can be very important. When the further into the mission you get, the more you have to very quickly spot the enemy, and then quickly shoot at those tanks. This is an extremely deep and tactical game, as you have to flush out the enemy forces and then try and take them on with a much smaller number of tanks on your side. But you do have a wide range of weapons and supporting equipment to help you out. Moving on to the PD, we have Mission X Raid 2, which is a shoot-'em-up construction kit game, and one that seems to be all about using the graphics from Swiv. But due to it being a Suke game, it is much slower. And it doesn't have any of the fun upgrades. There are icons that look like them, but it's all about some extra points. Now, because this is borrowing graphics from a better game, it does look nice enough. But it is a shame really, as it just makes you want to play that better game instead. The second PD title is Shootout, an odd little shooting game where you play against waves, with each one having more enemies than the last. Now, surprisingly for this type of title, and it being PD, you can fire at a really high rate. I'm always expecting to be limited to just a few bullets on screen. But this isn't the case here. This does mean those early waves will go by very quickly, but it does really start to ramp up. Now, your only real goal here is to get a high score, by trying to last as long as possible. As amazingly, this isn't a one-touch death. That bar under your score will deplete when you're hit. But due to how quickly you can fire, it's more about trying to avoid the enemies when they come bouncing in from the side. It's a simple game with some basic but workable graphics, but it was a good bit of fun to play. The final PD title is Rollerpede, a sci-fi take on Centipede. As you have this spaceship that fires lasers, and with that you can take out the weird looking things that will leave mushrooms behind when taken out. Now these will end up forming walls that the enemy will bounce off, making things harder, or easier if you can actually line things up nicely. As you go on, you'll find upgrades that you'll get from the bouncing frogs, that is, if you can take them out. And you might get better guns or a shield, but these will only last a limited amount of time. There are also flying saucers that you can shoot at for extra points. Now, to make things harder, you'll also have to deal with enemies that will walk along the ground, so you can't just stick to the bottom of the screen. All in all, it's a great little take on an arcade classic. Flying in next is Amiga Format, that comes with 2 demos. The first being Air Warrior, a flight sim that gives you a lot of options. Even in the demo, you have a huge number of planes to fly around. But if you're expecting to find something to shoot at, or shoot down, then you're going to be a little bit disappointed, as this is actually an online game, which is supported in the demo. Or I believe it is anyway, based on the text in the magazine. So all we get to do is fly around some empty skies. That is, if you manage to work out how to start the engine and move the throttle, which is thankfully explained in the same text in the magazine. But even if you were able to get online, you would be limited, as it seems they disabled your ability to shoot. So really, all you can be online is a bit of a target. So for this section, all you're going to see is me basically just flying around aimlessly. The other demo is for the infamous Top Banana. And even from the high score table, we can see hints of why this game is quite special. And if you've not heard of this before, then you're in for a visual treat. And when I say treat, it's more like a tuna and banana smoothie, as this started off as an Acorn Archimedes game, and it will pit you with the power of love against the evil equipment that is trying to destroy the rainforest, as we are trying to save the world. And we do this by travelling up the screen, throwing hearts at various things, as well as collecting items. That is, if you can work out what items you can collect, as there are a few of them that will kill you instead. But trying to work anything out in this visual mess is a bit of a problem. Now, I've known of this game and I've seen other videos on it, but I've never played it myself. And after trying out this demo, to be honest, I think I can safely skip it. Now, there was one other thing on this disc, a patch for the previous month's demo of Nightmare, so it will run on the newly released A500 Plus. And it's also interesting to see a compatible with A500 Plus label on the discs, as that was a bit of an issue in these early days. So let's move on to the final magazine of the month, Amiga Action, that over its 2 discs gave us 3 demos. And we start with Abandoned Places. That starts off quite nicely for a demo, with it saying hello and then walking us around this large map. Now, I'm not sure if this is showing you where you'll go in the final game or not, because when we get into the demo itself proper, we find a dungeon crawler with what looks like the typical 4-party system. You can attack by right-clicking on the weapons, and it seems in this demo there's no cooldown to that, so you can just spam attacks. But there's little in the way of feedback if you've hit an enemy, or if they've hit you for that matter. So for a while I wasn't even sure if I was actually in a fight at all. I also spotted that you could quickly fire off spells, but they seem to just fly right past them. And it was after a while that I realised that where the enemy is on screen is important. If they're on the left hand side, then only warriors on the left can hit them, and same for when they're on the other side, which isn't something I've seen before. But I'm not a huge fan of these style of games, so it could be something that's standard that I've just missed. But things did become a little bit easier when that idea twigged in my head. And then I could easily go out and explore the map. Now, I do like the little auto map in the corner that builds up as you go, and that fire blast spell, well, that is quite impressive, if very dangerous to myself to use. Now, this does look quite interesting, even if this style of RPG wasn't my favourite. So let's move on to Nightmare. That is based on the TV show. And unlike the 8-bit game that has confused and confounded many a player over the years, this is a dungeon crawler style game. Yep, it seems that style is back again. Now, we do have the Dungeon Master, who will show up in these portals and give us hints. There's also this thing that is also hinting at the competition that this game formed, as if you managed to finish the demo, you would get a code and an address that you could send it off to. And if you're one of the first 10 people to do so, then you could get a copy of the game. Where we also have a party of 4, but one of them has the classic helmet and the rest don't. Which seems a little bit odd, as it really should be one person in the dungeon with the others helping. But you have to follow the standard tropes of a dungeon crawler. But before you can go out into the dungeon proper, you'll have to get dressed, which means going into these alcoves at the side. As it seems that the helmet was the only thing that these adventurers were wearing when we started. And as we go into the dungeon itself, we'll find these switches on the floor that will open up random doors around us, as well as these creatures that will attack. Which is always fun when you're trying to work out what the controls are and how you're meant to defend yourself. This seems like a much better take on Nightmare, even if I'm not the biggest fan of dungeon crawlers. And our last demo is for Orc. Now, we've seen this game before, back when it was called Infiltrator, and that was basically just a memory dump of where the developers were in the game at the time. But this looks far more complete, as we have some actual objectives, as well as some light puzzle solving. Visually, it's interesting as they've gone for this lower colour count for all the foreground stuff, so they could do some more fancy looking backgrounds. But it has resulted in the baddies blending in with the foreground a little bit. The collision detection is also a little bit generous towards the baddies, as I swear some of those flying things hurt me while I was still a little bit away from them. And I couldn't even shoot at them either. But as you go on, you will find a key, and then a dragon that you have to attack and take on. And eventually, you'll pay a toll to finish this single level demo. But it does seem like a fun game. And with that, we've come to the end of the magazines. And wow, this was a bit of a quiet month. But there were some interesting titles, and these are the three that caught my eye. In third place, Border de Boer. This had a chance of being much higher in the list, but that extremely limited timer almost dropped it out of the list completely. In second place, Orc. It's another short demo, but one that made the full game seem far more interesting than the previous one that I had played, so this could be worth looking into. And in first place, I had to give it to Harlequin. This might be a bit of a cheat as I'm already a huge fan of this game, but I like to think that this nice, if also short demo, would have helped me decide to get it. And that is March 1992 complete. What did you think of my choices? Would you have picked some different games? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, I was the Goldfish. That was quite the odd collection of demos, and this was Goldfish on Games. Thanks for watching. Making these videos is great for finding games that I want to play, or ones that I might want to avoid. And if that sounds good to you, then you might want to consider subscribing to the channel, as I release lots of content every month. Or you could check out some of my other videos, there should be 2 on screen right now.